Okay, right, we'll make a start. Welcome to the second of our online meetings with a focus on assessment. We had one tail end of March and we're planning to do another one later on before the summer, yet to be confirmed for the date, and we're hoping to expand this over the next academic year as well, 25-26. Last time I recognise a few of the names, so I think a few of you were here last time. We obviously looked at question writing and the kind of skills that are assessed in question papers, and also we had a look at marking instructions as well. Hopefully it will give everyone a bit more confidence and give them a few ideas about how to actually start making their own sets of questions in terms of creating class tests, homeworks, and that, even prelims and that type of thing. We created questions last time for Higher and National 5 that spread across software and web and database, so they're available today. If you've not downloaded them already, they're available just as a freebie for you to use. There's marking schemes with them as well. What we're going to be creating now or looking at now are some processes that we can, and ideas for actually creating questions that we can use, and it allows us to help prepare the pupils as best we can in terms of class tests and so on. Okay, right, so hopefully you've got a link to the Miro board. That's how we're going to be running this presentation, so all information, and it's interactive if you've not used it before, all information and the whole session will be run through that Miro board. And also if you could turn off your mic and camera during the presentation, that would be good as well. We do have, if you want like a further chat at the end, then we have what we call an after party. It's not that glamorous, I have to say. That's at 8:30. And hopefully you've had a chance to look at the first frame there, which gives us the agenda for the day, or for this evening. Right, so as you can see, we've got, there's a wee like bio for each of us, and also more importantly, there's the agenda for tonight. So obviously this is the intro and welcome for the first few minutes. Then we're going to do a wee recap on session 1, in case, just to give you a reminder, or in case you missed it. After that, I have 7, we're going to have a look at partially completed questions and identify skills that are missing and how to go about creating missing content. Then after that, 7:45, we're going to go into breakout rooms, and we're all going to have a wee go at creating different questions. We've got the stems, and you're going to start to create different questions, come up with different ideas. And then right at the end, 8:25, same as last time, there's a wee bit where you can add some feedback or give some suggestions and ideas about what you'd like to see in the future, because obviously we are here to serve you really, and whatever you want to learn about or go over, we are happy to help. Right, onto the Miro board. So anyway, right, we'll go on with the Miro board and just give you a wee rundown of how it operates, because obviously it's a wee bit different from the type of software we'd normally use in class. Like we're usually, when we're teaching theory to classes, it's PowerPoint, so obviously this is a wee bit different. When you're on it, you can click the eyes, or you can click the initial of the presenter, and then you can follow them. It changes to eyes. There's a thing about cursor courtesy to kind of get things out of the way. There's always a wee bit, and we can just about see it on the right of this one. There's a pink kind of space there, and you can leave your cursor there so it doesn't block anyone. There's obviously different reactions you can create. They're all fairly obvious, like thumbs up or a love heart and so on. There's other ones if you're like not quite so sure, like a hands up or a concerned face if you're not quite so sure. But once you've used it for a wee bit, you'll get used to it. And obviously, if you were here last time, you should be fine with it. If you are struggling, then there's a Google chat as well. Obviously, you can post something in there if you're not sure. Okay, so if you want to, if you can, I don't know if it works this way when it's part of the call, but if you can, do a thumbs up just to show that all's fine and you've tested the Miro board and it's all working. That would be good. Right, so what we're going to do now is, as I said at the start, we're going to do just a wee recap on topic 1, because obviously we covered a fair amount and it was fairly intense what we're going over. So we're just going to do a wee recap, 20 minutes or so, to go back over that again. So Kim and I will be discussing that. So Kim, over to you.
Thanks very much, Andy. Okay, thanks guys for being with us. So for those of you who were not present at our last session, or if you're like me, your brain is just completely melted in the end of term chaos that has been last week with the exam, and we're going to do a quick overview of the important things that we covered in session 1. So we'll start off with the skills. We can see we've got this wee wheel here, and there were 6 main skills that are covered in any computing science paper. That's analysis, design, implementation, testing, evaluation, and systems. Sorry, in the table.
Yeah, that's right. So obviously we're all pretty familiar with those things. So analysis, design, implementation, test and evaluation are all covered in STD databases and web, whereas systems questions obviously appear just in the STD section, but not in the other 2. So within these skills, you also have marks in the paper which are easier to obtain and some that are trickier. There's more challenging questions in there as well.
Yeah, that's right, Andy. There's actually 50% of the marks in any paper which are allocated to these easier kind of C-band questions, as we call them, whilst there's 30% of the paper are the more complex A-band, higher order thinking questions.
Yep. Last time we covered quite a lot about Bloom's taxonomy and how there were different types of understanding which the pupils would be required to answer different styles of questions, some more challenging than others, depending on whereabouts in the taxonomy that the question would link to.
Yeah, and then we looked at some of the kind of more common command words that come up in the computing science papers, and as a group discussed where they fall under the Bloom's categories. And you can see here, for example, that the easier sort of remembering are usually the C-type questions that start with things like state, for example.
Yeah, and obviously we've got more complex questions that would start with evaluate or compare.
And we took a look at some of the questions last time as well and asked participants to sort of vote on which skill they thought was being assessed in the question and how many marks the question are worth. So just to kind of get us started today and get our brains working, we thought we'd have another little go of that so we could refresh our memory on how that worked, especially if anyone wasn't here. So here are our questions.
Okay, so we've got a question stem and 3 sub-questions. Each one has been coded with a colour. Using the dot voting options at the bottom, grab the corresponding colour to each question and vote on which skill you think it's relating to and how many marks you think it's worth. So obviously we've got blue, yellow and pink for the 3 questions, and just decide where you would vote for them.
Just to be clear, if you think the first question with the blue dot is like a design question and it's worth 4 marks, then take a blue dot from the voting at the bottom and move it to the box that says design, and then 1 to the box that says 4. Yeah. So guys, what we'll do is we'll just give you a couple of minutes or so to complete this task and see if we all agree with what the 3 questions are. And then we'll continue on to the next little bit. So go and have a go at some of the voting now. Grab the dots at the bottom and put them in the box you need. Great, so we'll go over each of these questions one at a time, but what I've done is to make it a little bit easier, I've changed the order slightly to reflect sort of the correct sequence that they would be in, because most questions follow the software development process, okay? So we're going to start by looking up what was the last of the 3 questions. So we'll start by uncovering the marking scheme first to let you have a look at it. Now, straight away, the first thing you'll be noticing here is that this is obviously a 1-mark question, which most people, I think, said, for those of you who did vote, I think most people said that in the last slide. The skill in this case was a bit less obvious, actually. A lot of people voted for implementation in the first one, but actually that is incorrect. So if we remove the skill was actually design. So data types come under the design section of the arrangements.
Yeah, but what we haven't talked about yet, Kim, is the level of difficulty of this question. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I thought instead of telling everyone the answer straight away, we could maybe put this to a little vote using some of the Miro emoji reactions, okay? So this is the voting icons we're going to use. I'm going to pop up the wee key on the screen. And I want you to use a thumbs up emoji if you think it's a C-band question. I want you to use an on fire emoji if you think it's an A-band question.
Okay, I see in the key here there's another blown head emoji with the mark. What's that for?
Oh yeah, well, I thought we could just use the blown up head emoji for a couple of things. Basically, if we have no idea, like what on earth, or fill in that comment however you see appropriate.
Right, I think that makes sense. Hopefully we've got people voting here, so it's all good.
Yay.
Loads of votes for C. Okay, right. Just
Okay.
a minute. I don't think anyone else.
On. Right, okay, so most people seem to recognise this was a C question. Unveil, please. Thank you. The command word state tells you that it is this nice, easy remember style question, is definitely under a C category. So you guys absolutely smashed that one. Well done.
Okay, good. Right, let's go on to the next question. So if I'm remembering correctly, this is the first of the 3 questions that we looked at earlier on.
Yeah, that's right, Andy. This one was actually the one that kind of confused a lot of people. So the skills people said for that one were everyone kind of said the same thing, but the marks, they went a little bit different. So right away, I think people were able to tell that it was implementation.
Okay, right, so this is implementations. This is a classic standard algorithm question for input validation. When people were voting in the marks for this one, it was mainly 4 that they were going for, and I'm presuming that's right.
Yeah, a lot of people actually voted for 2 as well, but yeah, let's see what it comes up with.
Okay, right. Okay, so there we go. It was 4 marks for this one. 1 mark for the conditional loop, 1 mark for the condition, 3rd mark asking for input inside the loop, and a final mark for the error message. Okay, so not a big surprise with that one.
No, well, actually, I think there was kind of mixed responses to that one. But yeah. This one, however, is where it gets a little bit more difficult for voting, because the first question was obviously 1 mark, right? But now we're looking at 4 different marks. So we're going to use the same voting buttons as before. But what we'll do is, instead of just saying overall for the question, I think what we'll do is we'll look at each of the marks in the marking scheme. So I'm expecting more kind of mixed results for this one. I think us, remember, as a group, we even found it really tricky coming up with what was the A marks and the C marks when we were doing it as a tutor team. So I can imagine it's tricky for everybody else as well.
Yeah, that's right. So I remember this one well. So what we'll do is, if you want to have a vote just on the very first mark that's listed in the marking instructions there, so the conditional loop, do you think that is a C or an A? Or you don't know? Okay, so we'll give people a wee minute. Lots of votes for...
Most people are saying C.
Yes.
Okay, what about the second mark, the correct loop condition? What are we thinking for that? Remember, blown heads is just no idea, or a B was somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, so lots of votes for A here.
Okay.
Okay, anyone else to vote? No, it doesn't look like it. Right, and 3rd mark for having the input within the loop. What do we think of that one? Okay, lots of C there.
Interesting. Okay, and finally, the 4th mark of the error message. What are we thinking for that?
Okay, some don't knows, some C's.
Or some middling ones. Okay, so mixed responses overall, leaning towards most of the marks being for C there, I would say. Would you agree, Andy?
Yes, loads and loads of those.
Yeah. So these are the correct answers.
Okay, so there's 1 for C, but there are actually 2 marks allocated as A marks. Am I reading that right, Kim?
Yeah, that's right. So the breakdown kind of works as follows. The error message, which most people voted as a C, is the actual C band kind of part of the question. I think we would like to think that all pupils would recognise that it was an input validation, because the word valid is in the question. And worst case scenario, even if they did that classic thing that the NAT4s quite often do, which is they just put an if statement in to state the error, and then it'll ask again just once, they would still get that mark.
Yep, and that can be a really common and frustrating thing when pupils do that and miss a loop, and then when they test it, they don't necessarily spot it either. But anyway, what about the A marks? Where were they allocated?
Well, we had a little bit of back and forward with this, but about what was the most difficult skills, and knowing to put the input inside the loop and then getting the condition right. That's the bit that always trips pupils up. Do you know what I mean? Even more so as well when you're using a language, especially like us with Visual Basic, where the condition can be either at the start and the end. I know you don't have the option for that in Python and some other languages, but that makes it a bit more complicated.
And that's fair. So what about the conditional loop?
I think the conditional loop is this weird one. It kind of falls into the weird middle category. Pupils obviously need to recognise the question is asking for input validation and then know that they require to apply a conditional loop in that scenario, which I personally think, and we kind of decided as a group, that it's slightly trickier than like a justice, like for a C candidate person.
Okay, so that makes sense. So we don't actually register that as anything then?
No.
We're between a C and an A. Okay, right, let's move on to the last question now.
Okay.
Okay, right, so for this question, most people went for 3 marks, which is reasonably obvious, 1 for each gap in the table.
Let's take a look at the marking scheme and see if you were right. Looks like we were. The skill, I think, here obviously is pretty obvious because it's clearly a testing question, so we can uncover that as well. Especially when the table mentions the word normal and exceptional. However, the interesting part of this question is, what do we think about the difficulty of these questions?
It looks pretty straightforward to me, but let's see what everyone else thinks. So for suggesting a set of normal values, what are the thoughts? Okay, so what would be a set of normal values? Is that
mostly thumbs up, it looks fit.
Mostly thumbs up for that one, so most people saying C for that one. Okay, and then what about for providing just a single word extreme to go in between normal and exceptional? Lots of C's again. Okay, right, and then finally we're down in the bottom row for the exceptional values. So what about for suggesting a set of exceptional values? It's lots of C votes again.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so most people are thinking C's across the board here. And truthfully, this could have easily been a fully C mark question. It asks you about all 3 of the different testing types. You only have to remember the specific term, the name for one of them. And the examples given for the extreme help greatly with the generation of the data for the normal data in the bit above. So it's the exceptional bit that stands out, though, as being a tiny bit more complicated. Can you spot the reason why, Andy?
Yeah, I'm thinking is it because there's additional guidance and it says that all values must be numeric, as in the question. Okay, so
yeah, that's it. The additional guidance is always a giveaway. So it's a more difficult spot, but in the wording of the question, it clearly states that the program is tested with a range of numerical values. So words like Kim or like hello world would be accepted as exceptional data for the program, but they wouldn't be appropriate for the context of this test in particular.
Okay, so that's all making sense, but I guess it's not an A mark either because it's probably not that challenging.
Yeah, correct. Again, it would be listed as 2 C marks, and then the other 2 would kind of fall into this weird middle category. I suppose be called a B, but isn't really officially called a B by the SQA.
Okay, right. So 2 C marks and then 1 of the other ones.
Yeah, other. Yeah. That's correct. So we will look at how it pans out overall.
Okay, let's do that.
Fab. So what I've done here is I've basically rearranged the questions all onto one page. And when you look at the spread of the skills, you can see easily where the gaps were. So if we were making this into, for example, a homework sheet or as part of an assessment, what you might want to do is then add in some analysis questions or evaluation questions that would help balance it out a bit.
Okay, and let's not forget, we could also include more design questions because according to the rubric, 30% of any questions have to be design related.
Yeah, that's very true. And also, what have you noticed about the difficulty of the questions?
No, I've not really spotted anything. What about them?
Well, of the 8 marks in total, 50% of them are C, which is right, as it should be, and 25% of the A's, which means that we aren't actually quite like far off the balance that's required. 30% of A's is needed. So they would just kind of need to be considered when writing the other sections of the paper, how difficult you make those questions, you know?
Yeah, and obviously this can seem a bit complex initially because we're talking about A and C level questions and getting the balance and the mix of them right. So no wonder people start to not feel fully confident in doing it, but it's a lot of time to just practice and keep on trying.
Yeah, I know, you're not joking. I like it just bamboozles me how people put these together all the time. So let's have a look over some of the most important points to take away from this and the stuff we looked at last time before we start writing questions of our own, okay?
Okay, Right, so I always think one of the best ways for question writing is by trial and error. Okay, so the more you do and the more you practice, the better you become. But you've obviously got to bear in mind it's a difficult skill in any question paper, like the SQA past papers have gone through many iterations and reviews, and I've had many pairs of eyes looking at them. And obviously, so therefore there's lots and lots of reasons why the final outcome becomes the way it is. Okay, so it's quite a difficult thing to replicate if you're on your own, just working on it.
Yeah, that's right. So what we've done is we've kind of noted down some of what we as a team think are the kind of most important points to take forward. So I'll have a look at ones on the left, Danny's going to have a look at ones on the right. So the first thing you want to think about is a skill sequence. So the questions asked must be in the order of the software development process. Although a question itself might not cover all of the skills necessarily, it is important to break, it is possible at some points to break the software development kind of process if you want to, but that's only if you're introducing a new requirement, perhaps like halfway through a question. Another important thing is to make sure the context is appropriate. You need to really know your audience. The scenario must be easily understood by 15, 16, 17-year-old pupils. And regardless, you must not assume any prior knowledge about something. So be really explicit with your examples. For example, if you're talking about a pack of cards, you'd need to say that there's 52 cards in a pack of cards and not assume that pupils have that knowledge. It's really important to create the marking instructions as you go along. Mark allocation is so important as it influences the level of detail that you're expecting in response from the pupils. So we encourage you to write the marking scheme as you go along, and you can always add to it. And there are times that candidates give unanticipated answers, for example, but they could still be correct. So it's really important to kind of build that in as you're coming up with your marking schemas and when required. The next thing you want to think about is your command words and making sure you use appropriate ones. So words that pupils have seen before in previous papers. It helps them to kind of allow them to understand what it is they're going to be answering. And if they practice that, they'll have gained confidence in what they need to do to answer specific question styles. And then tracking difficulty as well. It's important to keep an eye on what level your questions fall under, because if you end up with an assessment or homework that's got too many C questions, or in turn too many A questions, it's not going to give you or your students a real true reflection of how they're progressing through the course, because you might think they're doing better or worse.
Okay, that's great, Kim, thanks. Right, I'll go through the right hand side of the diagram now. Right, another important factor is don't give anything away. So it can be really tricky, particularly advanced higher and higher question writing, not to write answers or not to write parts of questions that would then form part of an answer for someone later on or elsewhere in the paper. So that's a really quite a challenging thing, is not to give anything away that could form someone's answer to a different question. Only assess content at that appropriate level. So you can, in a higher paper, you can obviously allocate marks from National 5 and vice versa. And this also applies to advanced higher too. Breadth of the content is really important, because you have to try to make sure that as much of the course specification is assessed as possible. But you also have to be careful there's no double penalising of pupils. So if there's a pupil in a situation where they have to answer 2 separate questions, but they're based on a single piece of knowledge, then obviously they'd be losing 2 marks rather than 1 there for not knowing 1 fact or 1 piece of knowledge. So that's obviously a bit unfair in them. Right, we speak all the time about question writing and we talk about the question paper and so on, but actually there's not actually any English teacher would tell us, there's not actually any questions on it. They're all statements, they're all instructions to the pupils. So it's an instruction with a command word telling them to do something. And finally, we're obviously, as we hinted at or discussed earlier on, there's a variety of skills that need to be assessed. Okay, so we have to cover a whole range: analysis, design, implementation, testing, evaluation, and also computer systems. As we had a look at earlier on as well, there's a weighting for each one. So that's quite a tricky part, to make sure you get the balance right in terms of a question paper there. Obviously, it's more important where it's a prelim, where you're trying to cover the whole course rather than just a homework or a class test. Okay, right, so that was a quick summary of whirlwind through what we got through last session, with some kind of new bits of information and new bits of learning thrown in too.
It sure was. I was thinking it might be useful though, as it's important to have this information in the back of our brains as we're building a piece of work up for our pupils. I mean, if all of our class assessments, homework tasks and classworks was to reflect the kind of correct balance of skills and complexity of questions, then we're much more likely to get this better reflection of how they're performing and help them, the pupils, to understand where we need to fill the gaps.
Okay, that's right. Kim, thanks for that. Right, we're going to hand over to Colin now, and we're going to look at a bit more detail about how we build up some of these essential question writing skills.
Hi Andy, that was really good. Thanks for that. So we're going to look at questions then.
Yep, I think I recognise this from the first session.
Yeah, so this is one of the higher STD questions that we used last session. So we'll give you a wee second just to have a wee read through the STEM itself. So it's all about an online auction website, tracking the bids, highest bid wins, users register with an email address before they can make their bid. When the auction finishes, if 2 or more users submit the same highest bid, each user's emailed with a chance to increase their bid, and a program's needed to determine the winner of each auction.
Okay, right, so some of the questions we used the last session are here, but let's imagine we want to extend the question so that it covers a full range of skills at higher level.
So we've covered a couple of the skills in the questions shown, but there's way more that we could squeeze out of this STEM. So have you got any suggestions, Andy?
Well, the first question covers analysis and the second one covers some of the implementation content. So I guess we could go with more implementation, because obviously that's, according to the rubrics, that's the biggest area where we can allocate marks.
That's true, but we need to remember that the rubric will try and get a balance of the marks. So we can't have a full question that's just all analysis or just 10 whole marks of implementation. Okay,
right. So next logical one would be design then, because we've not really spoken about that yet.
Yep, there's loads of design that you could add to that, and it's often quite easy to turn an idea for an implementation question into a design question in order to get that kind of balance of skills.
Excellent, right. So, but obviously we're missing testing and evaluation content as well.
Yeah, so those bits are definitely missing. So let's focus in on the testing side of things. What we're going to do is try and think of different ways of asking testing questions. So if you were trying to do that, Andy, where would you start?
Probably where I usually go for these things, just start to look at the past papers, 2024, 2023 and so on, start to look at them.
Which is absolutely fair enough, but the purpose of these kind of upskilling sessions are to try and get people better at writing their own questions. So where else could you go?
I suppose the course specs, the next logical place. So what content's covered with testing and STD at higher?
So if we take a look at the kind of testing section of the kind of course spec at higher, we've got the kind of comprehensive test plan. So we can talk about something to do with that. We've got different types of errors, syntax, logic, and execution. We've got our debugging techniques, so dry run, trace table, breakpoint, watchpoints.
Okay, so that's a good summary of all the different things we can ask about and what the question would cover. But what should we do next?
So the thing to do is to try and use that content to come up with as many different ideas as you can for different types of testing questions.
Okay, right. So what about some straightforward type questions, like asking about a comprehensive test plan or why it's used? Or we could ask about different types of errors, like syntax, logic, or execution. Or we could ask for a description about some of the debug or one of the debugging techniques. Or quite a common one I remember from past papers is providing students with some code, but there's an error in it and they have to try and fix it. And we've also got trace tables that feature quite commonly at higher level as well. So it would be good to ask students to complete a trace table. Maybe they can then spot an error in the code if they do that and fix the error depending on how many marks we're trying to make the question for.
So that's great. We've got loads of different kind of ideas. Now we just need to try and start turning some of those ideas into actual questions.
Okay, right. So that sounds good. So we can build up a bank of different question styles that all apply to testing, and then we can just chop and change them depending on whether we're going to use it as a class test or work in class or a homework or a end of unit assessment or something like that. But how do you know what a good question would look like and which one would be the best one to use?
So this kind of goes back to the things that you were discussing with Kim earlier, the command words that you use, so the kind of higher order thinking skills from Bloom's, the number of marks that you want to allocate to a question, what details you're going to need to include in your marking instructions. So let's try and take a couple of your ideas and let's try turning them into actual questions. So we've got the STEM at the top.
Okay, right. So what about this one here? What is a syntax error? Okay,
So your kind of first faux pas there is you're not allowed question marks. So we need to start thinking about your command words. So what command word would you be using?
Okay, I forgot about that. So no question marks, so it's just a statement. So what about describe a syntax error?
That's better now that we've got a command word in there, but syntax errors are also at N5, so where would the higher content for that question be?
Aye, that's a good point. It does seem a bit more straightforward. So it's not quite that clear either what we're really asking them. Are we asking them to describe what it is or give an example? So maybe pupils would be a bit unsure about how they're meant to answer that question.
So even if you put in some code there, you would struggle to write a higher question that has a syntax error. So I think we're probably best off to move on and let's pick one of your other ideas and see if we can get something out of that.
Okay, right. So what about this question? Explain the difference between a watch point and a break point.
Okay, so that's a good start because we've got our command word there, explain, and that's a higher order skill. And it's more straightforward than just it's a higher order skill than something that would be straightforward like a state or a describe. How many marks would you allocate that?
I think if you're asking about two things in a comparison, then it'd be logical 2 marks, one for a description of a breakpoint and one to describe a watch point.
Okay, I'd agree on the 2 marks, but go back to your question. Do you actually ask for a description?
The question asks for an explanation, so does that mean we'd need to change the wording of the question?
No, the wording of the question's fine. You just need to maybe rethink your marking instructions. So how else could you allocate those 2 marks?
So what about 1 mark for talking about a breakpoint stopping a specific line of code and a 2nd mark for talking about a watch point stopping when a certain condition is met?
That sounds good. The only slight downside to that question is that it doesn't have any problem solving in it.
So what's your thoughts on that question? Is it not quite good enough that we could use?
Not at all. I mean, it's still a perfectly valid question because 50% of the marks in the paper should be C-level questions. But think back to your ideas from earlier. Would any of those ideas give you a bit more problem solving and maybe let you squeeze out a few more marks from testing?
Yeah, so when I think about other ones that we've used, it tends to be ones where there's a bit of code, an algorithm, and that's the best way to ask a question about testing the code.
Absolutely. So like almost all the SQA question papers at N5 and higher have some sort of broken code in them where there's an error and you need to find it or fix it or describe it or explain the error.
Yeah, but the STEM didn't have any code with it when we first had a look at it.
But there's nothing to stop you from just putting in a small section of code and then asking a question based on that.
True, but there's not much to go on with this STEM, so where can we go with this scenario?
So again, that goes back to Kim's point from earlier of breaking the STEM so that you can actually add in some extra detail. You could add something like the completed program has a feature that does X or a new feature is added to the program that does Y.
Yeah, okay, so if we look at this STEM, I could maybe add something about add an email address or something like that, maybe.
So doing that, something with the email address would give you an opportunity to introduce some string handling, but then that might be better as a design question or an implementation question.
Okay, right. So if we think a bit more about the auction situation, auction scenario, how about adding someone counting the number of winning bids? Now, if I add some code that had an error and then ask candidates to complete a trace table. This would help them locate the error, and then I could ask them to describe the error, explain why the correct output is not produced, or they could also go on and rewrite a line of code to fix the error. I think we're probably all seeing questions like that.
So that'd be great, because then there's definitely going to be some A marks in there.
Okay, and what about some code like this with a breakpoint in line 97?
Okay, so you've got a breakpoint, but technically that means you won't have a trace table, because it'll just be a table showing the values of the variables instead.
Yeah, I suppose the trace table would need to go line by line from 87 and track all the variables right through each iteration of the loop.
Which would then mean that your trace table would end up being massive. So let's stick with your breakpoint idea to think about how you're going to build the kind of table of values that we're looking for.
Yeah, I suppose the best way was probably to actually do a completed table and then remove bits that the people would then fill in the assessment.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's the best way to do it. So once you've got a completed table that looks something like this, you can then look at the kind of different options about what it is you remove.
Yeah, I know, but how do you know which are the best ones to remove?
It's a tricky one, because it really depends on the level of complexity and the number of marks that you want to have available. You don't want to make something in the trace table so trivial that, like, you've just removed the loop counter. But then again, you need to think about that 50% of the marks on the paper should be C marks.
Okay, so what about this?
That looks good. How many marks would you give it, and what would those marks be for?
Right, so we've got 3 columns here. A mark for each row would be 4, or 1 mark for each column, but then 3 marks seems like quite a lot, because the values in column 1 are pretty straightforward for a higher candidate, and the highest bid only changes once as well, so maybe 3 might be a bit high.
I'd agree. So how about something like 2 marks, 1 for column 1 and 2 together, and then the second mark for column 3?
That looks good, Colin. The second mark has been allocated for only changing the number of winning bids to 1, and then 1 is duplicated on the subsequent row when it should change to 2.
Yeah, and that's the bit that's kind of trickier, and that's the bit that's likely to kind of generate that A type mark.
Yeah, so that's obviously the table complete now. Can we add anything else?
Well, the purpose of the breakpoint is to try and help debug the code. So your initial idea was to kind of follow up with asking about the error or how to fix it, or something like that will allow you to get another mark or 2 out of this part of the question.
Yeah, so as I was talking about earlier, in the past papers, I've seen questions along the lines of describe the error, or explain why the correct output hasn't been produced, or rewrite the line of code to fix the error. So what type of question should we go for?
Again, it's great that you've got different options, and again, it will depend on the number of marks and the level of challenge that you want to include in the question. Remember, we talked about Bloom's taxonomy in the last session, and the command words that we'll use, that also has an impact on that level of difficulty.
So something like state the line number of the line that contains the error might be a C question.
Yeah, but something like explain why this code doesn't produce the expected result would be more likely to include an A mark, because generally candidates find explain questions more challenging to do.
So how about asking for an explanation of why the correct output is not produced? This would only have 1 mark, and the expected answer would be something like none of the bids can be higher than the highest, or something like that.
Great. So now that's taken shape into a really good question that focuses on testing.
Thanks, Colin. That was great. Thank you.
So hopefully you can see that there's more than just one way to ask a question that covers a particular skill. In this case, we focused on testing, but the same process applies to the different areas of the course.
Yeah, it's been great coming up with different ideas for questions, taking the ideas and turning them into questions, and then thinking about what would work and what wouldn't, what would be too challenging or what would be too straightforward.
So now it's really time for everyone to have the chance to develop their own question writing skills. So I'll pass you over to Morag, who will describe the remainder of the activities and how we're going to carry them out for the rest of the session.
Hello everyone, welcome back. And it's just me, you got me, chaos me. And more chaos is going to happen because this frame that you're looking at is headed breakout rooms, and during the last presentation we kind of agreed there's only 7 people around, so we thought maybe we should avoid breakout rooms. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a sort of shared development together of questions. So yeah, I'm skipping ahead. So what you're going to see in a little moment is a question stem. The question hasn't been developed, and we'll all have a chance to think about the skills and questions that could be fleshed out to form a complete question. There'll be chances to brainstorm question ideas, join the chat, select options, and then choose the best ones and develop them further. So we've allocated about 30 minutes to this so that there's plenty of time to really get stuck into it. And thinking about, remember, we need to do the mark allocation as we go along and the marking instructions as we go along. So hopefully everyone feels that they can contribute. Don't worry if you don't feel you've got a lot of experience or you don't have much to contribute. This is all about upskilling, and the most important thing is to just give it a go, have a go, and learn from it. The goal in each case is to create one complete, fully fleshed out question that covers a wide range of higher content and presents challenge. Remember, in the back of our mind, we need to think about there needs to be challenge in there to hit some A marks if we can. We're not looking at those smaller questions at the beginning of each section. We're looking at the questions that tend to come towards the end of each section, in this case, section 1. So we're not going to have a breakout room. We're just going to move on to the next little section. So I'm skipping ahead, and but hopefully what you're looking a skill wheel. And what we've got at the very centre of that wheel is a question stem, which in a couple of minutes Kim and I will be quiet and you will have a chance to have a read over it, and we'll play elevator music in the background, not Colin sing to us. And what we're going to ask you to do is read the question stem and start to think about what ideas are popping in your head. What could you ask about that? If that's the beginning of a question, where could you go as a teacher? What could you write? What could you ask your own students to do with it? And round the question stem there's a wheel, and on each of those frames is a focus of one skill. So there's an analysis and development methodologies frame, design, implementation, testing, evaluation, and we do have a computer systems frame because an important component is integration. So we should be trying to find in those more difficult, longer questions, some opportunities to integrate if it comes naturally. So we're trying to look for that. So all the way around, you'll find those individual frames, and on each frame, there's a sticky pad, a note, just grab one and type up your idea. That's the plan. Anyway, now, I covered all that? Yeah. If you can't remember your content, below the wheel, immediately below the skill wheel, we have the content grids that you can buzz about, and you can get, just if you need a reminder of what is it that's in the higher STD. It is a higher STD question, and we've got all of the content grids there for you. For each of the skills, and we've also got computer systems, so you'll be able to bob about and have a quick look at them.
Yeah, so now that you can see them just at the bottom there, Morag's just kind of hidden them, so you can see them down the bottom. If you click anywhere on the Miro board, guys, you automatically become an unfollower of Morag or me, because some people are following me, who's following you. It's like a wee train of people. It's nice. So you can zoom in and out for context. So what I would do is zoom right into the stem and have a little look at that stem already in greater detail and have a bit of time to read it. And then if at any point you get lost and wander off into the deep, dark depths of the never-ending Miro, you can just follow Morag or I and you'll get back to sort of that middle area, and then just go round the wheel and sort of answer the questions. Just ideas at this stage. We're not looking for fully fledged questions, just ideas of what you could ask questions about, just like what Colin and Andy did at the start of their last session there.
Yeah, it is just your ideas. We'll have time later to fully flesh them out, so just go for it. Remember, the one thing is, we're kind of doing a double act here, Kim, and we're switching things about, but you can break a stem. if it's easier, if it makes it easier to ask analysis questions. And what I mean by that, so if you want to ask an analysis question and you see the STEM, you might need to break it a little bit, put in a little bit of information and then ask a question and then rejoin the STEM later on. So like part A might naturally sit in the middle of what we've got as a question STEM. So don't feel to be afraid about that. I'm going to shut up. We're going to play elevator music and leave you guys to sort of wander about. If anyone gets lost, give us a shout on the mic, you know, and we'll try and help out. There's not a particular time limit on coming up with ideas, but we've got lots of them there. So really, I think, Kim, we should maybe sort of just give you an idea of what's going to happen next. So yeah, what we're wanting to do is to take all our participants to really focus on our different skills. So we kind of need you to identify what you would really like. If there's something, looking around all the we've got 2, 4, 6, 6 different frames in the wheel. Maybe it's a question you've contributed or a question you quite like the look of somebody else has contributed. There's just some ideas there. And we would like to now start fleshing these out to actually come up with some questions.
Yeah, so we want to make sure that everyone has something to work on, and we also want to make sure that we cover as many of the different skills as possible. Yeah, and what we're going to do in a little moment is ask you to we'd hoped in the breakout rooms, Kim, we were going to do a little discussion here about who wants to do what. What we want to do is make sure we've covered as many different skills. So we've got a question that's got lots of different skills. We don't want 6 at this stage, 6 implementation questions. We would like a variety of skills and getting as much as we like. We want everyone to do at least one. If we show you the kind of end to the right, if you're following me or whatever, then over here we have got documents, a Miro doc, and the Miro doc is a clickable document that you guys can type in. It's a joy. And once you feel ready to go, is grab a post-it, bring it over with you and leave it just below the document. We'll take a blank document template each, if that makes any sense, Kim. Over to you. Grab a post-it you like the look of and bring it over to the bottom of a document that's going to be yours, and allocate yourself a post-it and a A4 sheet, really, isn't it? At the moment, there's 9 template documents, and if we need more, we can copy them across, but I think that's enough to kind of get us started, isn't it? The original question STEM has been copied into each of the template documents, so everyone should be able to work on a separate template of their own question and type up the wording for their fleshed out part of their question. You don't need to worry about anything like formatting, question, labeling, anything like that, because we'll do that later when we pull the questions together. This is purely just an activity, and all that's really needed is the question wording. And as you see when you start to use the documents, you'll agree with this, Morag, there's not much real formatting you could do anyway. You don't have much control over anything, but the page will just continually get bigger, won't it, as you type into it? So there's plenty of space.
It will. Yeah, so basically everyone will have one template document each with below it the post-it that they're working on to develop into a question, and remembering to put in your mark allocation and how you feel those marks should be awarded, the marking instructions. So grab your post-it, bring it over to the right, place it on below the document that you're going to work on, then somebody will know it's yours and they've not to use that template, and they'll move further to the right to grab a blank template that no one's working on yet. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the first thing you want to do is then click on the bit at the top where it says skill focus, and then type in either analysis, design, implementation, or whatever it is you're going to be doing. And then the next, click and delete the bit that says type your question here, obviously, and type up the wording of your question, and add the number of marks you want to allocate it after the equal sign. And then basically you should be able to kind of click and delete the provide marking instructions and explain how you want your marks to be allocated. But just remember, the most important to think about is the mark allocation itself and the marking instructions at the point really when the question's being written, rather than writing the question first and then doing it afterwards. So have a think about the bigger picture.
So if we get 9 blank ones there, haven't we? And they're all identical.
9 blank ones, yeah.
They're all identical. Yeah, the
Yeah.
question, the STEM is duplicated there. We need people to go in and click in. First of all, what is the skill focus that they're working on? So if it's analysis, you click in at the top and click about it as analysis. Replace the bit that says type your question here, type over that, click in, type over it, and put in your wording. The number of marks allocation, put in your mark beside the equals, and then underneath you can start typing up your marking instructions. And we will format everything into a single question later on afterwards, and we'll make that available. Yeah.
And if you find the Miro
It looks
board like environment itself too distracting and you want to focus on what you're actually typing, you can click the little double-headed arrow at the top above the template document you're working on, and it'll like take you into
Yeah, up there. Yeah, right at the very top. When you click on the document, you'll be able to get a wee pop-up appears, and there's a double-headed arrow you can click.
So just now we'll give you some peace and quiet to get creative and start working on developing your question. We'll all be available to give you some help if you need it. If you get lost, then you should just be able to follow one of us and we'll be in the general vicinity, or you can just give us a shout in the chat. So choose a document. They don't have to be in order just now because we'll reorder them just.
Yeah, don't worry about it. Just don't worry about sequence. Just do as Ian's done. Grab hold of a template, stick your poster below it, and start working on that question and see how it goes. Yeah.
Okay, so the plan is we're going to pull all of them together and edit them and turn them into usable questions for everyone, isn't it?
Yeah, we'll turn that certainly into a question. We'll sequence it, put like the analysis, design, and we'll do it in the sort of
chat about it at the next session, maybe.
The question paper order with marking instructions. So yeah, there'll be a usable question from it. Yep.
Right, will we stop there then?
Yep. Thanks very much, everyone.
Yep. So here we are. We've come to pretty much to the end of the session, not quite the end, but almost at the end. And what we hope to do now is what we plan to do is sort of give you a list of what we've got available for you. But hopefully you enjoyed some of that, just getting the opportunity to see other people working and thinking. And it's I always think it interesting at like SQA when we're sitting as a writing team, just hearing how other people are thinking about things. It's just interesting to be in that sort of collaborative point and share ideas. So what we've got in the swag bag tonight is some question stems. We've created, obviously you've seen one higher software development question stem where there's the beginning. I always think sometimes the hardest thing about writing a question is to actually generate the idea in the first place. So we've put together some question stems for you, 3 higher ones and 3 N5 ones, so altogether 6, except I think there's 8 in total because there was 3 higher SDD stems just in case we ran out of ideas for the first one, so you've got even more. And what would be amazing would be if any of you felt you had time to sort of look at them in the next week or so, next couple of weeks, and just put some ideas on paper in the same sort of style. Grab one of the templates, grab one of the stems and throw some ideas on it, throw some of your question ideas on it, and it'd be amazing if you felt you could share it with STACS, who could share it with the community, and therefore people could use it with their classes. If you felt like doing that would be wonderful. The email address to share it with are there. Brendan's is there and mine is there. Don't worry about writing them down or anything like that or having to memorize them. They are on the files when you download them, so these will all be downloadable very, very shortly. In fact, once the session's finished, this should be available to you. There's all the question stems and there's a marking template as well. In addition, anyone who missed any of the files from the first session, those files are available as well if you want to get hold of them. So that's fully fleshed out questions at both N5 and higher levels. The other thing to say about the question stems is we do have database in there and we do have web in there as well. Tonight has all been about software development because we knew that's what everybody would have in common. But in fact, we did want to cover the options as well. So we've covered database, we've covered web, There's a stem for each. They can be broken up, used in any way. There's a wee bit of code. There's data for the tables, but you don't have to use it. You know, there's lots of different ways of doing it. So that's the swag bag. Hopefully you've enjoyed the session. You've got something from it. And just to finish us off, I'm going to hand you over to Andy, who is going to just finish off the session for this evening.
Hopefully you've enjoyed the kind of information and learning that we covered at the start, and then also the practical activity where we'll come up with different ideas for questions. What we've got, this is similar to a similar board to what we had last time for those of you that were here. So what we're looking for now is for you to share some thoughts or some feedback or some ideas as well would be good too, because obviously we are trying to respond to what you guys want really. So if you give us a bit of feedback about what you thought, what you like, any ideas for future sessions as well would be appreciated too. I'll just
very much been,
do that.
We've been very much focused on question paper writing, as in like whole papers, but in actual fact, if you know, we'd be keen to hear what people would like us to focus on, what other aspects of assessment people would like some help with or us to focus on. So that would be really helpful, especially when we're planning even the next session, but the sessions into next session. It'd be really good to hear what you would like us to focus on next.
Yeah, because it's only been question papers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything to do with assignments, really. So if people were interested in that, for example.
Even sort of short, like homework task or sort of formative type things. I think, you know, those aspects of assessment we haven't touched on yet, but we know they're there in the background.
Okay. That's our roadmap there. As I was saying, we're going to be looking at reviewing questions week commencing the 26th. And then that'll be the last session for this academic year. But obviously we'll then start planning what we're going to be doing in the next academic year as well, 25-26. Obviously we only started in March, whereas next year we'll have the full year to be able to have a look at it. There's a couple of graphics there just reminding you about STACS Connected as well. And there's obviously all those resources that Morag was talking about as well that you can get access to as well if you wanted.